Hi everybody, welcome. Welcome. Today is going to be chat 5 of our colors and genetics topics. And we're going to be talking about dotted white. So a little different than what we've been discussing in previous videos. We've gone over the bases, we've gone over sparkly, and dotted white I think is just a logical next step. So this gene is unique to the other genes that we've covered because its location is different. It's a dominant gene and it's located on the S locus. So it can be on a bird that is homozygous for genes that are on MC1R, and that is also homozygous for genes that are on ASIP. So this is I've been corrected about this, but to keep it simple, I'm still not going to say that dotted white is a base because it is not located on MC1R. It modifies the bird in a way, and this is the terminology that makes sense to me. This is why I call it a pattern modifier, even if it's not technically correct, not scientifically accurate. But what it does is you have your underlying base patterns, and the dotted white gene will layer on top of those underlying base patterns. So it modifies the appearance of the bird, but it doesn't subtract from the genes that are still underlying. So visually, I see it as a modification. Understand that that's what I'm saying when I use that term. So hello, good morning. I see Brandon. Good morning, Brandon. So dotted white is the gene that is responsible for tuxedos. And it's also the gene that's responsible for the variety that we know as English white. They're the all-white bird, typically have a dark spot on the back of their head, very popular production line within the United States. So that is the gene that is responsible for those two different types of varieties that we see. So dotted white is interesting when we start working with it because, like I said, it's not on MC1R, it's not on ASIP, so we can layer dotted white, heterozygous dotted white, and homozygous dotted white on really any of the base patterns that we went over, as well as sparkly. Whether or not that's a technical base pattern, we'll kind of put a pin in it. But it's a very simple, it's simple in the way that it acts, and it's simple in its phenotype. So if you have a dotted white bird or an English white bird, this is how I would explain the variety based on what I think it should be. Of course, take this with a grain of salt because it's just what I think it should be. Whether or not it's actually universally known as the way that I'm going to explain it is I'm not sure. We'll see. We'll see what the comments section say. But I see an English white as being a clean pharaoh bird with homozygous for the dotted white gene. So it's a clean pharaoh base with 2 copies of dotted white, and that's what I see as being an English white variety. Now, there are a lot of people who have English whites. They refer to them as English whites, and it's a common term that people will give to any bird that is homozygous for the dotted white gene. That may not be wrong, I'm not sure. But color breeding wise, it's simpler for me to learn about the genes and to see the varieties as being on that clean pharaoh base. So for today, and for when I talk about the English white variety, I'm going to be particularly thinking or referring to a clean pharaoh base, homozygous for dotted white. The other varieties that will be in that mix when it's talked about, generally speaking, you can have any kind of base pattern under those 2 copies of dotted white, and you can still generally call it an English white. So how do I want to go into talking about this? There are some breeding tips that I can give you, but there's also this thing that popped up when I started color breeding that I wasn't expecting. This was newbie times. I would have an English white bird, and I'd have another bird, let's say a pharaoh. And from that cross, I would get things like Rosetta. I'd get things like Tibetan. I would get things possibly like Italians from that cross, and I wouldn't understand why, because I was thinking visually, I'm working with a homozygous dotted white bird, right, an English white, and I'm crossing them to something basic. So why am I getting all of these different varieties from that cross? So the easiest way that I can explain how dotted white works is you will have your parent stock, and your parent stock will have all kinds of different mutations on there, or just pharaoh base, but we'll say all kinds of different mutations on there. And what the English white does is basically you're taking those birds with all those different mutations, the base patterns and diluter genes, modifiers, whatever it is that they have, and we're gonna give that bird 1 copy of dotted white. So the visual that I can give you guys is what happens is basically you're taking that bird, let's say it's a blue pharaoh, okay? We're gonna take that blue pharaoh and we're going to kind of dangle it over a white paint can. And it's gonna flap its wings, not be very happy about it, and it's gonna splash a little white here and there on the wingtips, on its belly area, typically on the chin, sporadically in different areas of the bird, right? That's just a 1 dip. 1 copy of dotted white gene, right? Heterozygous. If we take that same bird and we dip it twice, what's going to happen is it's still going to be that blue pharaoh underneath. But on that second dip, we're going to really dip it in and we're going to pull it out, and it's going to be almost completely white, if not completely white. That's what the dotted white gene does, is it covers the underlying mutations with these layers of white. 1 layer making tuxedo, 2 layers making that English white phenotype. So when we are mentioning English white, there are different patterns that you can see, because when we dip that bird in the paint, it's not going to look exactly the same every time. It's going to be, there's going to be a natural, like a variation there. So for homozygous, when you dipped it twice, you could see anything like an all white bird, no brown whatsoever, no underlying patterning showing through, just completely white. You could more commonly see that dark spot still there on the back of the head that did not get that white. And you can even see more heavily marked birds that might have patches of brown or patches of that underlying pattern on the back of the head, down the back. You won't see any colored markings on the wings, and typically you won't see them any on the tail feathers. You'll see them predominantly on the back of the head and on the back of the bird. Those are more heavily marked English whites, to say it in a general way. That can be confused with some of the other white genes that are out there that are also located on the S locus. And those could potentially be white-winged pied, or could potentially be splash, potentially panda, which may or may not be the same as splash. I haven't worked with either one of those. Splash is in Australia. We may or may not have it in the United States. I have not worked on it, and I have not worked on panda either. So those genes, we're just gonna kind of put them up in the corner and leave them there, and you guys can look more into them if that's something that you think that you may have in your flock. But that that heavily marked homozygous dotted white bird can look similar. Sorry, my dog. Can look similar to sorry, my mailman is coming and it's not a very good time. Okay, sorry, intermission. So, where was I? So the phenotype that a heavily marked English white can give off can look similar to those other white genes that we're putting up in. This is a gene that we often see in our backyard flocks, and it's often one of those that is a little bit of, it takes time and energy to remove it. So in the last video that we did, we talked about, I gave you guys some breeding tips to keep English whites or tuxedos out of your breeding projects, because if you want to not have tuxedos as a goal or not have English whites as a goal, it's going to be an extra step to remove those genes if it's not something that you really want to be present in your flock. So we'll talk about how they work when we're trying to breed for them, and we'll also talk about how they work when we're trying to remove them. So a heterozygous English or a heterozygous dotted white would look like this genetically. And that dotted white gene does not hide. It is not recessive. This is on a farrow base. You can have this be on a Tibetan base as well. And that would be your Tibetan tuxedo. You could have it on a Rosetta base as well. That would be your Rosetta tuxedo. You could have it on a fawn enhanced Rosetta base. Let's use a different color for fawn right now because I'm already using that one. Let's say this is fawn. Your fawn enhanced Rosetta based tuxedo. And if you're sticking diluter genes on there too, it does not matter because this dotted white gene is occupying the S locus. So none of those other genes, unless they're on the S locus, you're going to be able to always have homozygous dotted white on that bird, okay? So how it works genetically is, let's say your goal is making tuxedos, okay? What you're going to have to do is very easy. If you have an all white homozygous English white bird, you can make any kind of tuxedo that you want because that male, give me another example, visual. That male is always going to pass on one of those dotted white genes to every single one of his sons and daughters because he is homozygous for that gene, and it is a dominant gene and it is going to be visible on each one of those babies. If you cross him, excuse me, to a mother who also has one copy of dotted white, you're going to produce something a little different. The same thing. The baby will grab one copy of dotted white from dad, so automatically it's tuxedo already. Then it has the option of grabbing this copy of dotted white and also being dotted white, or it has the option to just grab farrow, in this case from mom, and be a tuxedo. If you're looking to create a whole flock of homozygous dotted whites, all you need to do is start with one bird. It can, with the gene, it can be heterozygous for dotted white, just be a tuxedo, you can create a whole flock of English whites from that one bird, because this is a very dominant mutation that you're working with. So let's say you have a tuxedo male and you put him with all Tibetan hens, and he's a Tibetan-based tuxedo. Commonly, that's what you'll see in a lot of celadon lines. But let's say your tuxedo male is being crossed to your plain Tibetan hens. He is going to throw 25% of his offspring. 25%? Let's do it on our papers. I want to give you the right percentage. If you guys don't have one of these, you should make one because they're very helpful. So, sorry, we're making our breeders. Bear with me, or fast forward if you're on the replay. Okay, so this is Daddy. He is homozygous for Tibetan and heterozygous for dotted white. This is Mom. She has no dotted white, but she is also homozygous for, well, she's a Tibetan, homozygous for extended brown. So the babies are going to grab one of his extended browns and one of her extended browns. Then they also have the option, because this dotted white layer is on top, it's a different location that we're working with. The baby's either going to grab this or not. Okay, so 50% of those babies will also be tuxedo like Daddy, and 50% will not be tuxedo. They will just be Tibetans like Mom. Okay? Sorry, visuals help. So the tricky part in this is that you can create tuxedos easily. However, working with the underlying base patterns under that dotted white is what is going to take more effort and more intention on your part. So if you are trying to create, let's say, just Rosetta tuxedos, the base pattern that is underneath the homozygous gene, that homozygous dotted white gene that you're using for your breeder, is going to matter, okay? You would have to, if you want to create 100% Rosetta tuxedo babies, you would need to have either pharaoh mothers or a pharaoh father, okay? We'll say dad first. We'll say dad. Actually, no. We'll say dad is Tibetan, because that's what I've got in my mind so far today about our visuals so far. So we'll say that dad is Tibetan-based. He needs to be Tibetan-based if we're going to cross him with our pharaohs to make Rosetta tuxedos, because the base pattern, underlying base mutations matter in that cross. He's going to be giving one copy of that extended brown to his babies, and also he's homozygous for dotted white, right? This is what we're saying that he is. Homozygous for dotted white. Tibetan-based. Here's our dotted whites. He's given one of these to his babies. That's Rosetta. That's the Rosetta portion. And then he's also giving one of these dotted whites to the babies. There is your 100% Rosetta, heterozygous EB, tuxedos, heterozygous for dotted white. If he happened to be a pharaoh-based homozygous dotted white, so if he was English white with a Pharaoh base, that's going to give you a completely different result. What that is going to give you is going to give you 100% Pharaoh tuxedo offspring. Okay, there's no EB here. There's no EB here. They have to grab one of those copies of dotted white. They're going to be tuxedo on a Pharaoh base. If he has diluter genes like Rue, that's going to alter your what you get for your results. If there is something hiding, like a recessive gene, that's going to alter your results. So we can make tuxedos, but if you want to make a specific type of tuxedo, you have to look at your breeders as if first they don't have dotted white. That's not something that you're going to consider first. You're going to look at their base pattern. You're going to look at any other types of genes that are on there first. And then you're going to consider how many copies of dotted white that bird has and how many the offspring is going to grab. Now, how do you know what the base is, the underlying base is for a homozygous dotted white bird? How do you know what the underlying genes are for an English white? You can sometimes see it visually on those patches that are showing through from the underlying base pattern. You can see commonly if it's Tibetan based, if it's Rosetta based, if it is Pharaoh based, but you're not going to see anything hiding. And about, I want to say 50%-ish of English whites, so homozygous dotted white birds, will hatch out with no markings at all. So in those cases, you're not going to see what's underlying. This is where test breeding comes into play. So for test breeding, this is where having a clean Pharaoh line is really important, because you can take any bird, whether it's male, female, doesn't matter. If you have a clean Pharaoh or clean-ish Pharaoh line, you can take that bird that's in question, you can breed them to your Pharaohs, and you know that your Pharaohs, Pharaoh is the only thing that they can pass on to their offspring. If you're seeing other genes pop up within that offspring, those genes, the phenotype of those babies, unless you're working with recessives, but on the first cross, the phenotypes of those babies are going to be able to tell you what is in that dad, what that dad is base-wise, pattern-wise, base-wise, if there's diluters, all those things, they're going to show through on that offspring. Depending on the mode of inheritance of the types of genes that he has, that he's passing on, it may take 2 generations for you to see everything. But with autosomal incomplete dominant genes, if you test a bird with Pharaoh, you will see what those are, what he has on that first cross. Okay? So if you have an English white or a homozygous dotted white bird and you don't know the underlying base pattern, cross it to Pharaoh, look at the babies, and determine what he is base pattern wise based on what they are. If you have questions about that, let me know. I'm gonna take a break for a second. Okay, so I don't see any questions, guys. I don't see any questions. I think that's all I'm going to cover for English white. Let's talk about how to remove it first. I'll see if there are any questions that pop up. But I think we should have just one video on this because it is an extra gene that's on top of everything else that we've just talked about. So it might take a little bit to kind of process and digest it all and go out to your flocks and see if you can visually identify any dotted white in your flocks. So if you do, excuse me, if you do have birds that have sporadic white feathers popping out, you likely have the dotted white gene. It could be one of the other genes, but likely the more common case scenario would be dotted white. So what happens when you have random dotted whites in your color breeding projects is that you're going to get tuxedos from your color breeders, and you're also going to, if you breed the tuxedos and tuxedos together, you're going to end up with creating English whites within your color breeding projects. And if you're putting a whole lot of time and energy and effort into difficult color breeding projects, you don't want that white gene to mask all of that hard work. So I would say that it'd be best to keep the dotted whites only if you like the look of tuxedos and that's your goal, or if you want to produce something like a jumbo dotted white or jumbo English white line for like meat production. That would be a good goal. If that is your goal, it really doesn't matter what the base pattern is under those 2 copies of dotted white, because with production lines, the goal is to create the bird with the least amount of color that you see visibly, and it gives a cleaner pluck, right? When it comes time to harvest them. The skin just looks cleaner without those different color pigments shining through on the skin and things like that. So if you're getting a production line, it's probably going to be a few, if not multiple, different mutations under those 2 copies of dotted white, but it really doesn't matter. If you're looking to create a color breeding project and you want your homozygous dotted white birds to produce really clean and predictable tuxedos, it is going to matter. And likely you're going to want those homozygous dotted white birds to be on a farrow base. Okay? So when you have dotted white in your color breeding groups, it can be harder to see them on certain types of base patterns versus others. So typically, heterozygous dotted white, when it creates a tuxedo on EB, on an extended brown base, it will create a really, like a cleaner penguin look, right? Typically. Sometimes you can get the messier ones with the smaller patches here and there, but typically it will create a nice penguin looking bird. With the fawn and with the farrow base patterns though, they seem to be just more sporadic white feathers here and there. You'll see a white chin, possibly. You'll see a couple feathers on the chest, possible white primaries. Those are common, but they're not commonly going to be as nice looking as far as that tuxedo appearance as an EB based one would be. They vary. Every single bird is going to be different, but that's just generally how they work. The phenotype is not as strong on farrow and fawn compared to EB based tuxedos. You can also have tuxedo pansies, you can have tuxedo calicos, you can have tuxedo sparklies, you can have everything tuxedo if you want to. But if you go out into your farrow breeding pen, that would be the first one that I would look at if you're using them for color breeding, to take out any breeders in that pen that may be looking like they're tuxedos and remove them, put them into a different breeding program or sell them, put them in the freezer, whatever it is that you do with your breeders. And if that's all you have to work with, what you want to do when you're breeding them is just work backwards. And I gave an example of this yesterday, but I'll give you another example of working backwards. Instead of taking breeders and breeding them together to bring out or to get more copies of those genes layered on top to kind of come out to the surface, you're going to be identifying your breeders, and you're going to choose the ones that have the least amount of white that you can tell, right? And then breed them with non-dotted white birds. The minute that you breed a tuxedo to another tuxedo, or you'll get more tuxedos. So you want to, if you have a tuxedo dad and you have to use him, breed him to a non-dotted white hen or a group of them, hatch out the babies, and just use the babies that are not tuxedo babies for your next cross and cross them to non-tuxedo breeders. That's how you're going to remove it from your stock if you don't want it in the future. If it's homozygous for dotted white, and that's the only one that you have to work with, I actually talked to someone yesterday, and this was what her breeding project was. If you have a homozygous, let's say he's homozygous dotted white, so he's an English white bird. Let's say you chose him as your breeder and you didn't know anything about color genetics prior to. Now, everything that you've bred him to is like tuxedo babies, right? And now maybe you're like, oh, what do? I have all these tuxedos. I really kind of want to pivot in my goals and I want to have clean color lines. What do? I would reassign him to a different breeding project if you have space for tuxedos, because they are fun. But all of those offspring, they're going to, if you breed tuxedo together, they're going to create non-tuxedos, tuxedos, and homozygous for dotted white birds. They'll produce English whites. From those babies, you want to completely remove the English whites. Do not use them because that is a bird that's homozygous for the gene that you're trying to omit. Use breeders that do not have the gene, okay, that did not hatch out tuxedo. Use those predominantly, okay? It's going to depend on your numbers, but predominantly. If you can get one or use one of those that is a rooster, that's going to be really good because he's not going to have any dotted white on him whatsoever. He's not going to pass that on to any of his offspring personally. If you use a rooster that's tuxedo and hens that are not, then you're going to have more of a chance that, you know, you're passing on that dotted white. So if you could get a clean rooster without it, that would be a next good step. And all of your hens, the cleaner that you can use of those two, the better you'll be. You just want to keep hatching and keep breeding the birds that are heterozygous or not at all. Okay? Does anybody have any questions? Nope, I think we're good. I'll come back a little later and I'll check the comments area. And if you guys have color breeding projects and you have English whites in there and they're throwing a bunch of weird things and you're not sure what the base pattern is, you can list or you can share the offspring, pictures of your offspring, and we can try to kind of see if we can figure out what it is that you're actually working with so you can be more intentional with what you're putting that breeder with in the future and what you can possibly predict happening in later breeding projects if you continue to use him as a breeder, okay? So I hope you guys have a great day and a great weekend. I'll talk to you guys next week.